Good evening and welcome. My name is Charlotte Potter-Kasich. I am the Executive Director here at the Barry Art Museum. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. The Barry Art Museum is located at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia. We're an educational and cultural resource for all of coastal Virginia, with pieces from around the globe. The Barry Art Museum further supports Hampton Roads as an international arts destination and extends Old Dominion's commitment to providing arts education within a research institution. Our collection has three primary large areas: American modernist paintings, abstract paintings, contemporary glass sculpture, with beautiful pairings like this that transcend time and media to start to discover different parallels between the mediums. We have a historical marine painting collection, which is just incredible and highlights some important regions in our area. But tonight's conversation is springboarding off of our historical automata and doll collection. If you're interested in the museum at all, I'd encourage you to go to our website and check out some of our other free programs, such as art-inspired yoga. We have 3D virtual tours, in-person tours, automata tours, to name a few. This evening, we're here to have a discussion with the Exhibition Advisory Board. This panel discussion is with a bunch of different thinkers and contributors, very generous makers that have all joined us to be able to talk about our process as we were developing this exhibition called MotionEmotion. This evening's program is brought to you by the Dragas Companies with support from Susan and David Good. We want to thank our presenting sponsors for all of their support as we have developed this exciting and very different kind of exhibition. Our Exhibition Advisory Board covers a lot of different sections of the campus, from the art department to the School of Nursing, the College of Engineering and Technology, Education and Professional Studies, Virginia Modeling Analysis and Simulation, Philosophy and Religion. So about the exhibit. MotionEmotion, Exploring Affect from Automata to Robots is an interdisciplinary show investigating the emotional qualities of automata and robots by pairing the museum's permanent collection with works of contemporary artists and scientists. Tonight, you're going to hear primarily from the scientists. The exhibition opens with the Barry Art Museum's collection of historical automata before shifting to the work of contemporary artists Elizabeth King and Joseph Morris. The gallery also features a selection of actual robots created in the Hampton Roads area. By highlighting the intersections between art, science, and emotion, this exhibition connects the Barry Art Museum's historical automata to 21st century interests, while also asking how robots can help us better understand our own humanity. So here's a few of the pieces from our historic automata collection. Automata are mechanical sculptures that predate robots. While robots and automatas have a lot in common, there's also some very important differences. Where robots typically use electricity as their primary energy source, automata traditionally operate through purely mechanical clockwork. Automata can also only perform a limited number of movements in a predetermined sequence, which they usually repeat until their clockwork winds down. Robots, by contrast, can be programmed to do different things, giving them greater versatility. Descriptions of automata appear in ancient Greek documents, but the earliest surviving European examples date from the 16th century. Prior to the 19th century, automata were designed primarily for the aristocracy, with each piece being a unique object. Following the Industrial Revolution and the miniaturization of clock parks, automata became mass-produced and were marketed to the middle-class consumers as art objects for parlors and other public spaces within the home. While automata makers existed across Europe, they were especially renowned in Paris due to its unique convergence of designers and craftspeople. Automata fell out of fashion during the early 20th century, but their influence persists. The clockwork was used in their movements, for instance, anticipates computer programming. While their humanoid form reflects our ongoing fascination with artificial human beings. The next artist that we decided to invite to the exhibit is Elizabeth King. And joining us this evening to discuss a little bit of this work is Exhibition Advisory Board member, Peter Udenbach. Thanks for joining, Peter.
Thanks, Charlotte, and thanks everyone for coming this evening. Just a little bit about Elizabeth King. She's a Richmond-based multimedia artist who works at the intersections of puppetry and human anatomy. And this creates intricate, articulated sculptures that are set in motion through the painstaking process of stop frame animation. The intimate scale of her work, along with the use of materials such as boxwood, porcelain, and bronze, evoke the appearance and materiality of 19th century mannequins and automata. However, the automaton's clockwork is normally concealed to heighten its illusion, while with King's work, she intentionally leaves the mechanics of motion visible. So the joints, magnets, and other components that allow a sculpture to be posed and moved are an essential part of the finished image. With figurative sculpture, there's always that challenge of how to render the body. Do we show its appearance and posture or focus more on what the body does and how it moves? And Elizabeth King's work speaks of that challenge of representing a living and moving body. And in her own words, she says that carving a hand, for example, and then cutting it up and inserting joints, how much machinery before I lose the emotional coherence of the image? At stake for me is our human habit of seeing a self both as a thing made of stuff and blood and a being or a someone with memories and plans. It is difficult to hold these two perceptions at the same time. Can I encompass both in a single work? And personally, it's very special for me to have her included in this show. She's been a friend and mentor of mine and a kindred spirit for more than 25 years. We met when I was still working in New York City and began a conversation that really has continued to this day. I guess it was maybe 10 years ago, she gave a fantastic talk up at VCU, where she was teaching until she retired just a few years ago, about the history of the eye and its origins. The earliest eyes were actually in oceanic life. And in that, she mentioned how whenever we blink, we're really washing a film of seawater over the surface of our eyes. And so that attention to detail and the amazing poetry and layered meaning that comes from attention to such details is really, characteristic of all of her work and how she approaches making things. So it's a really fantastic thing that we have her included in this show, which spans both early mechanisms and more state-of-the-art robotics.
Yeah, and I feel like Elizabeth is definitely the most tangible link from our historic collection to contemporary artists. You can tell how she's been so influenced by these dolls over time. We were really lucky enough for Peter to introduce us to Elizabeth just right up the road at VCU. And it's such a privilege to have the honor to work with her. Just today, she came into the galleries and was saying how she's thinking about trying to make sculpture with an open mouth now after looking at our doll collection, and how there was this technological shift at this one moment, and how emotion can be conveyed both through eyes, but also with the mouth, which I thought was a really interesting next step, perhaps, for her work.
Very interesting, yeah.
So moving along, the next artist that we are going to introduce you to is Joseph Morris. I first met Joseph Morris in Oxbow in the summer of 2012, I believe. He was a student of mine in a class that I was teaching. It was all about optics, glass blowing, and the eye and how we see. The work of Joseph Morris intersects robotics, computing, and emotion. He's based in Brooklyn. Morris is a programmer, a technologist, and a prototyper working through online open source communities, integrating technology into the arts through craftsmanship and coding. The pieces on view in this exhibit belong to a group of works known as the Emotive Machine. In this ongoing project, Morris creates abstract kinetic sculptures designed to cultivate empathy. Through his carefully designed motors and computer programs, his sculptures appear to breathe or to dance. These movements, in turn, encourage viewers to reflect on the biological presence, the divine experience of living in a body, and to become more aware of their own physicality in the space. By centering kinetics in his practice, Morris emphasizes not only the physical presence of his work, but also its experimental qualities, with the viewer and sculpture breathing, moving, and occupying the space together. This is one of those pieces you are going to have to come and experience in person. The next section of our exhibit changes drastically. It moves to a completely different direction. We start to think about robotics right here in Hampton Roads, Virginia. The work in this section represents current robotic projects developed through Old Dominion University and other organizations in the Hampton Roads area. At first consideration, these works might seem like a really unusual choice for an art museum, as they would conventionally be described as STEM-related industrial products and technologies. Yet, like works of art, they demand ingenuity, creativity, craftsmanship, and a willingness to ask challenging questions. In terms of function, the works on view here address a variety of needs, from military training to assisting children. Yet they also intersect in vital ways, not only through designs that reference the human body, but also through emphasizing the significance of emotion into the design and the function of these contemporary robots. From helping hospitalized children interface with their friends, to teaching police officers to cultivate empathy, these robots often center on emotional labor. And joining us this evening, we have Yvette Pearson, and she's going to talk a little bit about robot ethics.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. So yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm really excited about is that ethics doesn't get tacked on at the end like it often does in many areas. So this is exciting. So this exhibition helps illustrate, among other things, the value of integrating ethical considerations during the design, development, and deployment of robots. And as Charlotte just pointed out, the robots in this exhibit range from robots designed to be used with children in healthcare settings to robots used in the context of military and law enforcement training. But again, a common feature is that the robots and again, some of the automatons included in the exhibit as well, elicit emotional reactions. And again, in some cases, behavioral responses. Some of those are a little more unsettling, like robot abuse, but as embodied entities, robots have this potential to relate to us in unique ways. For instance, we may more readily form attachments to them, maybe even come to prefer them. We may place too much trust in their abilities in some instances. And we also may be deceived by their emotional expression and their apparent sentience or empathy. So the stakes are reasonably high when we consider how robots could impact child development and welfare, or how robots' interaction with military and law enforcement trainees might impact people's decision-making when it comes to matters of life and death. So we must consider the extent to which human-robot interaction is helpful or harmful to us, our relationships and society, and then ask how then should we shape the robots and our interactions with them? And what values should guide the design and deployment of robots that are going to in turn reshape the character of society? So we're rightly concerned about things like the potential negative consequences of malfunctions and misuses of robots, but it's also important that we think, as the designers of robots in this exhibit have done, right? What exactly are the ethical problems that might emerge from a robot working exactly as we intended it to, right? In other words, it's important to ask, of course, not only how, but also why we're designing specific kinds of robots and who's likely to benefit from those. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to have your voice as we've been developing the language around the show and considering a lot of the questions that this show arises. And thank you for your time and your expertise. So now we're going to introduce a project called David's Project. I'm going to show a brief video, and then one of the project designer and fabricator will come on to have a conversation.
David passed away in 2019. The project honors his memory. He's the inspiration behind a first of its kind robot. David Carey fought leukemia at CHKD, unable to spend time with friends and other patients because of his condition.
When we think of robots, its form and function, a brain of circuit boards, sensors, and chips. But Dr. Tina Gustin is searching for something with a little more heart.
When you're least expecting it, something pretty special will happen.
That moment came a couple of years ago. Gustin is a former oncology nurse and the current co-director of ODU's Center for Telehealth Innovation. But she also spends time at CHKD with her dog Dharma, therapy sessions with terminally ill children. One of those kids was David Carey.
He has very little social interaction with children because he was on contact protocol for so long.
During one visit, David's dad, Mike, found out about Gustin's work with telehealth robots.
I'll never forget when I told him about this robot, he said, "Oh man, you guys have it all wrong. Look at David. David hasn't left his room in 3 months. He should be operating that robot to go out and visit other children on the unit."
Shortly after that, Gustin made another trip to CHKD, this time swapping out Dharma for a robot.
It went very well, but we realized that there were things that it couldn't do.
So she took the idea to Yanis Papelis at ODU's Modeling Analysis and Simulation Center.
Kind of haphazardly over my shoulder said, "Hey, do you guys build robots?"
I'm like, hallelujah, yes, we can.
And just like that, David's project was born. After receiving a grant from the governor's office, the team here at VMask is now building the first telehealth robot designed just for children.
This is something that can make such a drastic improvement on families' lives.
They're even using a combination of student drawings from the Governor's School for Arts as a blueprint. It is a project that David won't get to see. He lost his long battle with leukemia in 2019, but he now leaves a powerful legacy behind. Not just a new kind of robot or its form and function, but the thing that's been missing all along, heart.
And that if it can make a difference for other families and other children to still feel part of a community, then yes, I'm proud.
And now joining us, we have Tina Gustin
David,
and Yanis. Thank you both for coming.
Thanks for having us.
It's wonderful to have you both here. So backing up a little bit, do you guys want to talk a little bit about how you guys met and how this new iteration of this, I guess, David's Project 2.0, which is going to make its debut to the public for the very first time in our exhibit, came to be?
Yeah, Tina, you go ahead.
This has definitely been a joint project, and truly the heart of it comes from David and his family and my past history working as an oncology nurse. And in designing this robot, Yanis and I have discussed how engineers, I always say engineers can build toys all day long, they're brilliant, but what are they building them for? And an important part of this project was having a focus group. So as we decided, that this is what we wanted to do, we brought together a group of parents of children that had been at the hospital with cancer. We had a focus group with the parents. We invited children that were cancer survivors to the focus group. We had them discuss what is their dream, what is their wacky idea, what is their must-have. And my first aha with this project was Yanis would say, well, that wacky idea can be done, and that simple thing you want, not so much. So that's really how we started it. We then went to the nursing staff and to the child life therapy group at CHKD to say, what do you want? We talked about how tall should the robot be? How can we make it kind of the size of a child? How can it fit into a corner and be easily cleaned? And then once we came up with the specs, David's mother and I went to the Governor's School for the Arts, and we decided as a group that we, from an art standpoint and from a childlike standpoint, we really wanted children to design what they thought this robot should look like, that it shouldn't be conceptualized through the mind of an adult, but the mind of, in this case, high schoolers. So Elizabeth Carey and I went and talked to the Governor's School for the Arts children, and it was an assignment that they didn't have to do. And I think we got like 30 some drawings back with regards to what they thought the robot would look like. Giannis and I can speak to it. Some of them, again, were kind of wacky and others were pretty practical. And we were able to take kind of a combination of the artwork and build it into what you see today. I mean, Yanni, you want to speak to kind of the back end of how you pulled this together?
Yeah, I mean, I think what has been really interesting for me, like you say, as engineers, we can build things, and typically the difficult part is actually knowing what to build right. And I think in this case, our job on the technology side has been listening first and foremost, and trying to understand when people describe what a robot should do and should not do, try to translate this into tangible things we can build, tangible technologies we can utilize. We're trying to not reinvent the wheel when possible, and sometimes we have to invent things because they're necessary. And so it has been a very interesting user-driven kind of development. And of course, the most important thing is always the backstory. We always build mechanisms and things, but the notion that every time I hear about David being in the room for 3 months, we know now what this is like because of COVID, and we were in our homes, we weren't in a room, imagine. And so this whole idea that this robot becomes an extension of the person. A lot of other things that, sometimes the kids are tired, so you can assume you can have a joystick and move it around. You don't want it to be able to hit walls. There's all kinds of stuff like this. And I think, like I said, that for me, the biggest challenge has been translating all of these, for lack of better term, requirements, a very dry term, I guess, but all of what it should do, and make it something that's tangible, that can be built and then tried. And this is iteration 1. I'm sure we're going to go back and forth a few times. This is an ongoing project, by no means completed, and we definitely appreciate the opportunity to showcase it. And it definitely, I think, qualifies in having a lot of emotion involved with it, which again is unlike most of what we build, it's just stuff. So it's been a great opportunity, and look forward to what it will become.
Mm-hmm. And I have to say, when we build these exhibition advisory committees, we don't quite always know what's going to come of them. We've done one from each of the changing exhibitions that we've done so far. And this was the first committee where this project landed in our laps, and it shifted the entire show. Because we really thought we were doing a contemporary art show about robots and contemporary artists that use robotics. And once we landed on some of the research that was happening right here on campus, which we weren't so aware of, and you'll learn about more in a few minutes, suddenly we realized that we needed to really shift our thinking as an art gallery or an art museum, and start to think about showcasing more of what happens across campus. So thank you for helping us see things differently as well here. And we've actually had a really fun internal debate. This is so dry and silly, about whether or not it goes on a pedestal. I really want to put it on a pedestal because I think it's a piece of art. And then the curator's like, no, I really think it needs to go on the ground because it's the correct height for a child. And then it's like, yeah, but my kids are going to come in and they're going to beat it up. And then it's not going to make it out to the hospital because they're going to try to play with it. So it's really interesting and starting to challenge us about our architecture of display and some of our preconceived notions about what these things do. I want to ask you, just for a little bit of feedback, you have brought this into CHKD once with the original one to do some tests. What were some of the successes, and maybe what were some of the challenges, and what did you have to redesign for the 2.0?
That's a great question. So I will say it was fascinating when I took the first robot in, which really was rather clunky and not as adaptable as this one. having been a true believer in pet therapy and going into the same rooms that my dog had gone into, children that interacted with the dog and was happy to be with the dog, when I gave them the robot, it was like, oh man, mine, I can do this. And, the nurses were like, how do you make this work? And you'd hand the remote control to the child and the robot was flying down the hall. And that's when I had my aha that it gave them truly a sense of control.
Right.
There is very little control for a child that is isolated in a room at a hospital. We're fabulous at engaging these children, and child life is a key factor in the hospital. And for those of you who don't know what they are, they engage the children in their emotional well-being, and they have toys and coloring books, but they can't control their day. And the children could control this. And the other piece that was so powerful that's in this robot as well is the face on the robot, the screen, is actually the child's face. And so as they travel through the hospital, as the robot travels through the hospital, I'd like for you to think of it as truly an extension of the child. And it's quite different than, and one of the things Giannis asked early on is, so tell me, what is the difference between handing them an iPad and allowing them to use this robot? And I think Giannis had his aha moment when he talked with the families and the children of, oh, I remember you walking away that night saying, I get it now. I really get it. I would say that robot wasn't childlike. It was not able to move through certain components of the hospital. It didn't have a basket or something to send the robot into the playroom to then pick up. The child could then go around the playroom with the robot as an extension of themselves and say, I want this, I want this, I want this. And that then goes into the basket on the robot that they bring back to their room. Some of the other things that we're going to build into this is gait training with the child. So the children that can get out of the room, but they feel terrible and they need to walk around a unit several times a day and they don't really want to, they can control this robot and walk with the robot. And our plan is to have physical therapy from the ODU department to help us kind of program software the robot so they could put in how many walks and what a normal gait pattern is for a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, so that it can be part of their rehab as well. I mean, I could go on and on and on. It's just, it truly was meant to be an engagement of the child and an extension of the child, but the first robot lacked some of the emotion and the childlike artistic features that this one will have.
And, another interesting thing is, there are robots that people have used in the past to simply have telepresence. When you are sick, you can have your robot. In fact, the other day, Charlotte, one of the guys at the museum was carrying an iPad with you on Zoom on it, so it reminded me of that. I think a big difference here is that those robots, they were designed first and they were proposed as a solution. People didn't ask for them. And, there's tons of stories of people going in and sticking pencils on the wheels of the robot so the guy who's at home can no longer move, tipping the robot, putting something so that it gets blocked because of a sensor. And I think this is the kind of stuff that happens when you start with the technology first and try to move it forward. This is almost the reverse. This is the use draws the technology. And because of it, and as long as we keep listening and not go crazy and do what we think is right, but instead listen and do what is being asked for us, it is a whole different attitude towards the robot. The robot is not something that's imposed on you as a forced solution. It is an enabling technology that can have such a great influence on quality of life, quality of time, and so forth and so forth. This has been fascinating, I guess, from that standpoint, on seeing the big difference in attitude when you pull something, let something be pulled versus push it.
I can give you an ethics story as well. When Yvette spoke of the ethics in robots, the first iteration that we took to the hospital would go to sleep. And when the robot went to sleep, it still had audio on, and there wasn't a light or something that let anybody near the robot know that it was still listening. And the child had sent the robot out to what's called a pod, and the nurses were out in the pod giving report. And we found out that the child had the robot out there sleeping so that they could hear what was going on. So from an ethical standpoint, the robot hadn't been designed with that in mind. And so we are designing the robot in a way that there's a light on when it's out, but the sound's still on. And anybody looking at the robot can quickly determine that, well, he's asleep, but he's listening to you.
Right, and what's interesting, those things are trivial to do technically. Another requirement was that, if a nurse at some point doesn't want to have to deal with a robot, there's a little joystick in the back of its head. The nurse can pull the joystick, press a button, they take over the robot, and no matter what the kid does, the nurse can put it away. Little things like that are not hard to do. And again, these are the things where people are like, well, it would be great if, of course, this is so easy, putting tracks on it, that's harder. So having it fly in the hospital, that's a little harder. So
It sounds like kids will be kids and they'll still terrorize if they can. So given a robot anywhere.
that's right.
but
No
we're
weapons
still-
either. No weapons. We heard about that too, like being able to shoot things. That's a different robot, but
Different robot.
not in the
not for
hospital.
the
That's right.
hospital. Well, the Bay Area Museum is really honored to have the opportunity to feature the David's Project 2.0. As we said, it'll be on view. It'll be the first time everybody's seeing this new casement and some of the new technology. And thank you both for sharing your research with us and allowing us to show your new piece of art.
Thank you.
Okay, next we are going to learn a little bit about the Now robot and the work that's been happening in the engineering department at ODU.
Now is an autonomous, programmable humanoid robot. The university's Vision Lab used the Now robot as a test bed for computer vision and AI research. The robot will support the lab's ongoing collaboration with Eastern Virginia Medical School to research facial expressions in children with autism spectrum disorder.
Hello, I'm Mel from the Vision Lab. Welcome to the Berry Art Museum.
This is a humanoid robot Now.
His name is Now, and he may be the future of autism intervention, helping kids with a developmental disorder learn to better communicate and socialize.
He can talk, he can be programmed to do movements.
The idea for the research came from ODU professor Dr. Khan, whose nephew has autism.
That's where the interest started.
Khan's drive to help his nephew and others led to the study, which has two parts. The first uses web cameras to detect facial expressions.
You look happy.
Research assistant Megan Withrow demonstrated.
You look sad.
The goal is for interventions with children that have autism. In the past, we had some experiments where children came in and participated in trials where they looked at a stimulus on a screen, and that elicited some spontaneous facial response that we were then able to analyze and use the collected multimodal data such as eye tracker, 3D camera, thermal camera, visual video camera in order to find some significant difference in odd facial expressions. What Now does is he provides feedback to the children as they make their facial expressions and is able to, using machine learning and computer vision, give some response as to how they're doing and how they're making the facial expressions and help them improve their communication skills.
You look surprised. I am surprised too. You look happy. Let's do a dance. You look scared. May I give you a hug? Let's play a game with rock, paper, scissors. Get ready. Paper. Scissors. Go. I chose paper. See what you chose. It looks like you chose scissors. You win. Thanks for playing.
So now joining us is Dr. Khan to talk a little bit about the research that he's been doing with the Now robot. Thank you for joining us. Oops, are you there, Con?
I was muted.
Ah, good, hi.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Good, thank you. Thanks
Thank
again.
you so much for joining us.
Sure,
It's
thank
so
you.
interesting to see how you have used existing technology, which is distinctly different than the previous project, and are adapting it to try to address something that you saw in your own life. Can you tell us a bit more about it?
Sure. Thanks again, and sorry about that glitch, and good evening. So as you heard in that clip, the idea of this work actually dawned on me when my nephew, they visited us a few years back, about, actually I should say about a decade or so back. So as you know, those of you who have interacted with kids with autism, these kids, they do not interact at all. They do not like to look at your eyes. They do not like to communicate and things like that, right? So I have been interested in research at the intersection of engineering and biology. So this is one area that I thought, if there was a way that I could somehow help these kids to be able to connect better, communicate better, because that's what it is missing. Because as these kids grow, even with their parents, they don't really want to communicate at all. And as they grow up, they become more and more isolated. So from there, I reached out to my colleague, Dr. John Harrington. He is a pediatrician at EVMS. So he is actually a practicing doctor. He's got practice with kids with autism. And I explained that I would like to be able to do something to be able to engage these kids. And I invited him to my lab and showed him some of these toys, including this humanoid robot that you're looking at here. And then I said, okay, how about if I try to engage these kids and be able to somehow communicate with them? So the first step was really, and of course he was interested, he was excited. So the first step was really to be able to understand how these kids communicate or do not communicate, right? So that's the first step. So then we tried to capture these images, like some of those that you saw there. And in fact, if you happen to come to visit our lab, we'll be able to show you many of those toys there. So we have very high resolution 3D camera and other stuff. So we actually did a IRB approved study with John, and we brought over his patients, the kids with autism, in our lab, and looked at their expressions, facial expressions. We set them in front of a large screen TV. We basically displayed different types of games and things like that. As you know, these kids, they really like to interact with games. So even though they don't want to talk to a human being, but they would like to play games, right? We know that. So that's how we started. We try to understand exactly how they view, where they look at in the screen, and how they may or may not interact at all. So from there, the idea was to be able to come up with specific expressions and looking at their eye gaze to be able to understand what motivates them, what prompts them to interact, or at least try to look at your face or your eyes. And the next step of that was really to bring this robot in that environment and be able to prompt. So in psychology, sometimes also called scaffolding, right? So you bring something to grab the attention. So that's what we're trying to do here, bringing these robots to be able to prompt these kids to pay attention, to interact if possible. So our goal is really to be able to come up with specific markers, features on the faces and eyes of these kids in response to any type of stimuli that might get their attention. And once you get that, be able to use it to prompt them, to scaffold them using robots like this to make better eye contact, to make better communication, and eventually be able to come up with a solution that could be used in the clinics as these kids visit the clinics, to be able to improve their social interaction and be able to communicate better. So that's the whole idea.
It's really fascinating. You know, it's interesting. When I first heard you talk about this, I thought, I misunderstood, and I thought that the robots were going to become translators for the parents. You know, they would read the eyes and be like, Jimmy's upset.
No, that could also be a possibility once we actually figure out exactly what is that the kids are doing or not doing in response to whatever prompt that we are trying to get to them, right? So in fact, as you see these robots acting, actually there are algorithms, code running in them. There are actually processors inside these robots. And these robots with those eyes that you see, those are actually cameras. They're grabbing those pictures. So in set, when this, he's actually an undergraduate student in my lab, when he was interacting, you could see his face in the inset. So that's the camera view of this robot. So you're capturing those camera images and then processing them. And actually there are AI algorithms running in the background, trying to understand the expression of this, this student. So if the robot can understand, which you saw that it did, when this student was happy, the robot could say that you're happy. So the robot could actually spell it out to the parents that, yeah, that your kid is happy now or sad or whatever it is. So yeah, that's definitely possible.
I think it's fascinating. You know, if you had told us 2 years ago that we were going to be using technology to connect to people in this way, and that we're all going to be this disconnected, people wouldn't have believed any of us. But now none of this seems so far-fetched. After going through a pandemic, the idea of really leaning into technology in a lot of different realms to try to help translate for all of us and connect better, it really starts to resonate in a completely different way. And I can imagine, I mean, you've been doing this project, you've had this idea for over a decade. I'm sure it seemed really crazy when you first thought of it, and now it doesn't seem even that futuristic. It seems so real.
In the beginning, yes, it was a little bit crazy, but I really appreciate my colleague and friend, John Harrington. He bought into it, and he got so excited, and he was willing to actually bring his patients in my lab. Without him, we could not do it.
I think it's just a really wonderful example of the kind of interdisciplinary conversations that get to happen at a university, and you know, the partnerships between CHKD and EVAMS in these last two projects are just really profound. And thank you for sharing. And also thank you for allowing us to make the arrangements with some other labs around campus to have a Now robot on our in our exhibition. So there is one that will be there for everybody to see. And we hope to have a few sessions where it'll come to life and actually talk to the audience as well. So it's exciting to have our own Now robot on display. So thank you, Dr. Khan. Okay, so moving right along, next, we're going to show you something that's a completely different direction from everything that we've shown you to this date. We're going to the military applications of robotics in our region. As most of you know, we're one of the most heavily military-based areas in the world with a large Navy population. And so this is some of the innovation that's coming out to support that kind of industry.
The HTT, or Human Type Target, is an advanced training platform. The standard approach to marksman training uses static, predetermined locations for targets on a field. CIMIS, by contrast, has created a dynamic, semi-autonomous 3D target that navigates the field. The HTT is a live fire training platform that features a 3D hit detection capable target. Its goal is to produce a more immersive training environment by creating realism in the field during training scenarios.
Okay, and joining us to talk about the HTT is Giannis. Giannis wears many hats.
Yes,
Giannis,
I'm gonna switch my
Yep.
hat now.
switch your hat, hospital hat off,
That's right.
military hat on. Talk to us a little bit about how this project got developed and how you got involved.
Right. So this is a completely different thing. This is a project that a local company has developed. Now the company has great ties to Old Dominion University. The owner, Johnny Garcia, is an alumni, very connected. But it's a separate company, and it's a company I've been working with informally for years now. And this is a project that, again, there is a need for the type of project, but there's always a balance between cost and availability and so forth. And so the company committed to doing it, and it has been developed. It is actually being sold right now. And it is, again, something that you don't think much about having an emotional component. I never thought of it as having an emotional component until people who aren't engineers or snipers look at it and go, wait a second, people shoot at this and it looks like a human, and what happens? Does it scream? Does it do, and all kinds of stuff. But it is, it's a kind of project that you don't think much about. Again, it's technology, you put things together. And as you're gonna see, for me, the interesting part about it is, this is one to teach people how to shoot. There's another one to teach people how not to shoot. And I don't know what this says other than, technology is what you make of it, and as engineers we build what is necessary to build. But it is the kind of thing that, if you haven't been around it is a little bit of an art of long range shooting. We had some, had an opportunity to work with some snipers and look at how they have to train and what they have to go through, and having a human-like movement in the robot is very important. Like the video says, a lot of times what they do for training, there's a stationary target, or they have targets that are on tracks. They're very predictable. These guys are smart. After a while, you can tell that this target will move a certain way. But these robots, you can program to do whatever you want. You can have them move in predefined patterns. You can even set up situations where if you shoot one, they all scatter and things like that. You can have them, some people have asked to have them, literally just move around for 16 hours so that the person can be there hidden 16 hours and then shoot at it 16 hours after they first took their position, all kinds of stuff like that. And so again, it's an example of technology that serves a purpose with added, I guess, aspect of it that it is a little bit weird. We will go in and not think twice about testing it, stabbing the torso. We have a screwdriver and you want to see if it works, you just stab it and it's like, oh, the detector is not working. People look at us do that, goes, what are you doing? You're stabbing the torso. But it's you get desensitized to it, and ultimately, it's not a real person. But the contrast is very interesting. Talking to Yvette and listening to her bring up things we probably didn't think much about until they were brought up. It has been very enlightening.
Yeah, and we're going to dig into that more at a lecture at a later date. We paired Giannis with Yvette to have these kinds of conversations, and they've both generously offered and agreed. So we will be digging into that even more in our next and later on in the lecture series. So moving right along, let's introduce your next project that you have been helping advise CMS with.
The ADRT, or Autonomous De-Escalation Robotic Trainer, is a method of de-escalation training for security and police officers. It was developed in partnership with active duty law enforcement. It supports a wide range of police training scenarios using artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies. Onboard cameras capture scenarios and track competencies of individual trainees.
So this is the other side of the coin, I guess. This is a situation where, again, you're trying to now, this situation, you are trying to evoke emotions. You're trying to, and the robot is designed to engage in a conversation with the officer. The idea is that an officer is doing their business. They're going around to, look at a complaint or check on something. And the robot, we can program it. It can be programmed to respond cooperatively, or argumentatively or outright hostile. And sometimes you can also have it respond according to how the officer responds. So if the officer makes a mistake, says the wrong word, or skips a part, the robot can become hostile. And the whole idea is to train an officer to basically not respond to hostilities and maintain their composure and follow their training and do what they're supposed to do. Unlike the other project, which from a technical standpoint, it's a little more feasible. This one is a fairly advanced R&D project. It's by no way completed. You can tell by a little bit, there's a little bit of crudeness in how it is put together. What's important about it, though, despite the crudeness, it is very engaging. You start conversing with it, and it can throw swear words. One of the things, we talked about not having it on because, there are opportunities for it to go south in the conversation. Despite, not looking like a human being, nobody would be confused about this. You do get emotionally involved in the conversation. And if you ever talk to a chatbot when you try to buy something online, you know how you can get really angry with it. It's very similar here. And there's also the added issue that it is a mobile robot. So as an officer, we had an opportunity again to go with officers and see what they go through and what they're looking for. They're very sensitive to having their personal space violated. So if the robot starts approaching the officer, or we can actually put two robots and have one robot start going behind the officer. These are big red flags, and the stress of the officer in the situation, even though these are robots and even though they know that this is not a real scenario, you'll be surprised how quickly the stress goes up. And so it is surprisingly effective for what it looks like in a way. And like I said, it's an R&D project, it's very interesting. And it's really hard to escape the irony in this is where we don't want to shoot the robot, and the other one is the one we want to shoot the robot. So I keep saying this like a broken record, but I just think it's funny.
No, I think it's really interesting. And so we've juxtaposed these two robots in the gallery next to one another. And this one does talk to audience members when they walk through. It's programmed to say things, it sort of moves, it blinks, it does things. It's very uncanny being near it. And it brings up that whole uncanny valley feeling of it. It's just lifelike enough. And I think everybody's just going to have to come and see it in person to truly understand the impact that this one can have. Again, thank you, Giannis, for sharing your research with us. And we're excited to be able to debut these projects. So we're going to end here. We're just giving you a quick overview of the show itself and tell you a little bit more about the programming that's coming up. How do robots help us better understand our own humanity? This exhibition will investigate the emotional qualities of automata and robots by pairing the museum's permanent collection with the work of contemporary artists and scientists. MotionEmotion, exploring the affect from automata to robots. Join us for a free public exhibition opening Friday, February 11th from 5 to 8 p.m. Okay, so that was me saying, join us. If you're not already a museum member, I hope you become one. We have a VIP members virtual exhibition preview next Thursday night. If you are a member, you'll just get an email with a link. You can join us. It'll be recorded. You can see it later on if you'd like. If you're not already a member, please become one. Check it out. It's going to be more conversations with the artists that are exhibited in the show, Joseph Morris and Elizabeth King. The public exhibition opening, which is for all of you, come, is next Friday, February 11th from 5 to 8 p.m. Museum members get free drink tickets. If you don't already know about it, we do have our Automa Tuesdays, which is an online and in-person. Once a week, we wind up one of our automata and we let everybody see how it works. It's really cool. It's very hands-on. We take the special top off and sort of let you see behind the scenes. And then we do a lot of different kinds of tours, but the one that seems to be the most popular and has already sold out once, so we've added another one, is our Valentine's Day Love Tour. So join us if you want to get romantic and see some fun stuff in the collection. The next one of our monthly series like this is between Con and Joseph Morris. So remember Dr. Khan, he's been doing work trying to help people understand emotion using robots. And Joseph Morris is making robots that are trying to emote. So that'll be a really interesting conversation between the two of them. We have a lot of upcoming exciting programming, everything from our after hours programming every second Friday of the month to our lecture series, our free Saturday tours at 1 p.m. In April, we're going to start doing Mad Hatter Tea Party tours. Lots to consider. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we hope that you have a beautiful evening. Bye now.